Uh, Purpose of the call is to introduce Chris. Chris is a transitioning U.S. Army soldier and just a great, exceptional guy. And I think there's a lot that we all on the call could learn from Chris's transition from the Army into the commercial side, outside of the Army. So if anyone has any questions, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand or use the meeting features to interrupt the call. But with that being said, I'll just start out with Chris. If you could introduce yourself, and I had 3 questions I was going to ask you just to kind of prompt the conversation. Like, what was your background in the Army? What did you find about your transition process that really helped you? What was the one thing that really helped you? And then the last question is like, so what's next? Where are you going, and what do you see? What do you see for yourself in a year?
Well, morning, Rod. I am going to be formally Staff Sergeant Trejo and moving to Mr. Trejo. So my actual job in the military was primarily commo, so IT. I have 2 MOSs under my belt, which I was a prior 25 Quebec, which primarily focused on satellite communications. And then I kind of moved towards a 25 uniform, which is more of a radio operator dealing with, secret like ComSec, HF, high frequency bandwidth. So I have a lot of cross training under my belt being in the military under this IT spectrum. And then I think for the most part, for one of the things that definitely helped me through this transition was understanding that I'm not alone in this transition, understanding that there are people out there that, look for veterans, and there's all these resources out there for veterans nowadays compared to back in the day. I know I would say when I first kind of joined back in 2016, which is, a couple years ago, and I know it was a little bit different for prior service members that, joined back in like the early 2000s. It was more difficult for soldiers to want to transition because they felt like there was nothing out there. And I think one of the biggest things that I had to overcome was understanding that in today's economy, in today's world, there is jobs out there specifically for veterans. And there's probably, I would say, a lot of government jobs, a lot of civilian contractors, civilian companies that encourage to hire veterans. So there's definitely things out there for veterans. It's just one of those things you got to take a leap of faith. If you do not have your heart in the military anymore and you feel like you completed your service, whether you deployed, you didn't deploy, you did training exercises, and you contributed to the military service, there are things out there for you. And it's just overcoming those fears and understanding that, you're not stuck doing it forever. And whether you do only 4 years or 20 years, you have some valuable knowledge, within your military service. And then next for my journey, and I'll kind of go more in depth on how I kind of got the job or the job that I have today, where I'm about to start. Luckily, my work ethic and my knowledge skills kind of led the way for me, and I grown to build connections and networking skills across the military and service members that I still keep in contact today. And luckily for your program, and since I joined the CSP program, I was able to build my own portfolio. That kind of led into one of my old battle buddies reaching out to me and seeing the knowledge and skills that I have now, and he kind of reached out, offered me a position with a government contracting job down at Fort Hood. And, it's looking pretty good. Hours good, salary's good. And I will still be doing, IT communications and all that cool stuff in the military, just on the other side. Get to be home with the family more and whatnot.
Could you talk a little bit about the skills that you acquired like, how did you, like, I know when I first met you, you had a perspective on what it was going to be like to get out, and you had a certain view. How has your view changed, and how has that helped you?
Um, so my view, and I think I can probably just kind of tell my whole story on how I got here. I think that's probably going to be the best way to kind of explain my story. Uh, so you know, prior to joining, I knew absolutely nothing about IT. Um, you know, I didn't really know how to work on computers. Didn't know how to do any of that sort. I was more of a mechanical guy. I liked working on vehicles. You know, I had this car that I was working on for a little bit. I learned electrical work. You know, how to deal with LEDs, stereo systems, bare minimum, how to do oil changes, stuff like that. Um, you know, at that moment, I honestly didn't know what I wanted to do. I actually was initially going to go to college for becoming a mechanic. Um, but luckily, you know, my support system, my wife that you know, at the time was just friend and then became my girlfriend. Um, she kind of pushed me to do something more with my life. Um, and again, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And backstory: my father was prior service, my mother-in-law's prior service. So, you know, I thought the only way fit was to join service as well. So initially, when I entered the recruiting office, I wanted to become a Bradley mechanic. You know, I wanted to still just do mechanics. Luckily, I think thankfully, there was no job openings for that. Somehow I landed on the MOS of 25 Quebec and had no idea what it was. No concept, you know, only the things that I've heard. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. You know, learn something different. As I was going through AIT and basic training was, you know, I think from, I think initially in basic training is when I understood that I had some sort of skills already that helped me be successful, which was leadership. Somehow I was fluently good at, you know, leading a platoon. Um, and, you know, um, everything that you go through in the military is just a learning lesson. It's a journey. It's a learning lesson that, you know, helps you develop and uses that experience to not only teach yourself but teach soldiers. Um, moving forward to AIT, you know, I kind of understood the basic concept of AIT. I actually almost failed one of my classes, and it was with radios. I had to fill some radios and change frequencies on it, and almost failed. Um, but you know, I drove myself to want to be the best I could be. You know, especially prior service. My family being prior service, I understood the concept of being a soldier. I understood that when you're downrange, you need to know what you're doing to benefit the platoon, the company, the battalion, brigade, downrange to make sure everybody got home safely. So I didn't take it with a grain of salt. I really wanted to know my job. That way I can bring home, you know, all the guys that are deployed with. So fast forward, my first duty station was Fort Hood. I was at 3rd Cavalry Regiment, Tiger Squadron. There is when, you know, I started getting more into the waters of IT. I would say 2-3 months in, they sent me to cadet summer training, working with the G6. I was just a PB2 at the time. Again, coming out of AIT, don't really know much. Um, Luckily, I was tasked with that G6, and you know, being in the military and being in the service, you start noticing things as you continue forward in your career, and unfortunately, there are good leaders and there are not so good leaders. Um, and I think the only reason why they sent me was because I was the lowest ranking, which, you know, better to me, hindered them. And I ran with it. So I learned how to, for a full week straight, I learned how to run cables, Ethernet cables, crimp cables. Um, I was out there, you know, with a couple of my buddies that were in the G6 as well. And we were just, you know, grinding away, building this whole building up for the cadets to do their training. And then fast forward, I continued learning computers, how to network computers, printers, phones, all of that nature. Next thing I know, 3 months later, I'm coming back to Fort Hood, and we start going to the field, completely straight into the field. And that was my first time working with the satellite terminal that I was using. I had, again, the last time I touched it was in AIT, so it's been a couple of months, right? And the only thing I had was the written notes in my book that I took when I was in AIT. So unfortunately, as you know, military equipment can sometimes be difficult to work with, depending on the maintenance. So that STT, the satellite terminal that I was working on, was completely horrible. It was not set up for success at the moment. So me and my 25 Bravo, we would stay up from like 6 in the morning to midnight, just working on the terminal, working on the switches, the routers, and configuring everything, and luckily I had a NCOIC. He was E5, formerly known as Staff Sergeant Dutton. I would say he has been the biggest contributor to my success in the military. It was a really solid NCO, really good NCO. He knew absolutely everything about IT, especially in the commo community. And one day we're in the field, he rips out all the cable out of the ST, and he was about a PCS. So he was only in the field for like 2-3 days, and I was left with the STT with nothing but cable ripped out. So moving forward, kind of going through all these field events, me and my buddy kind of go through, and we actually get it up and running. We get it to where it's syncing to the satellite. The IP configurations is all configured, and at the end of it, we're at NTC, and I would say, if I remember correctly, we had the best upper TI capabilities out of the whole brigade. So I think that was a big accomplishment. And in between all these, in between this whole event, right, there's a lot of things that I've learned, right? And especially working in the military and working with higher leadership, depending on what MOS you are and where you're at, right? You can either be in a company level, in battalion or in brigade. And, in these unique positions, you come across certain leaders that, have higher rank and have more power to kind of, I would say, help your career path. So, but one of the things that I learned is that if you're not trying, and if they don't see you trying, they're not really gonna, stick their neck out for you. And that was one of the things I learned at NTC, my first rotation, right? The SCT that I was working on, the ups broke. It popped a fuse, and I'm sitting there working on the SCT, and I already know what's wrong with it. And I have this major come out to me, hey, how can we fix this? It's like 9 o'clock at night. We just set up the talk. We're in this kind of training event, and I felt like there was nothing to do. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't make the ups work. There's absolutely no way I could get it functional. And my team leader at the time, he was still messing with it, still kind of messing with the cables. And I go up to him, I'm like, hey, there's absolutely nothing that we can do. Why are you still working on it? And his explanation was like, you got to show that you're trying. If you're trying, they won't really get on to you about, why it's not working and whatnot. Like, you just need to make sure that you're doing something actively to try and better the situation. And luckily that following morning, battalion or brigade was able to bring us a new set of ups, and everything was good to go after that. And as you're going through these events, these training events, you're building up to either deploy or do some extra sort of training. Luckily, I was able to go on my first deployment back in 2017. I was a E4 already. And unfortunately, one of the NCOs that we had, he was a staff sergeant, he kind of got fired after that NTC rotation, and led me to become the NCOIC. So as the E4, as an NCOIC, running the shop with my signal officer. and I had 3 other specialists underneath me. And you can kind of know how that kind of went. They were all older than me. I was the youngest one. I would say I was 20 years old at the time, and one of them was like 20, 24. The other one was like 28, and the other one was like 30. And we did bump heads a lot because they were in the service a little bit longer than I was, and I was brand new specialist running this commo shop, this platoon, and but I think everything that led up to it kind of developed me in order to run the shop successfully. I cross-trained a lot. I did a lot of learning, self-learning, and that's one of the biggest things that the soldier really has to do if they want to be successful. A lot of people kind of enjoy the 9 to 5, which is okay, right? But if you want to be successful, you kind of got to dive a little bit deeper into the knowledge skills that you want to be successful in, right? So not only was I working on satellite communications, I was also diving into radios already. I was learning high frequency. I was learning SATCOM. I was learning, JBCP capabilities, or JCR at the time. And another thing that I've learned is if you're in the commo shop, if you're a 25 series, you are just a 25 series. There's no specific MOS that's tied to you in a sense. Like when an infantry guy looks at a commo guy, they just see communications. He should know how to do radios, computers, and all this type of stuff. So I took that and ran with it. And my NCOIC, before I got to that position, informed me of the more you know, the more of an asset you're going to be to a unit, a company, brigade, battalion, all these type of things. So that was a big change in where I took forward to guide my path on how I wanted to be as an NCO, as a soldier, and as a signaleer. So I cross-trained a lot, I would say. So in the middle of this deployment, I was in Iraq. My battalion commander and battalion sergeant major hand selected me to go out to Syria to support a company, right? And I was thrilled. I was happy that I was selected to do that. I was going to be one of the few guys that actually went out to Syria during this time frame, and I was excited. I was going to get this really good deployment. I'm serving my country, and the only thing that's really going through my head is, do I know my job well enough? Am I going to be able to succeed and accomplish this mission for this company? And it was a crazy transition for me because I left Baghdad into another area, and that's when I got integrated with this company. Knew absolutely no one. Didn't think I knew enough for the job. I was pretty nervous. And at that time, I already got my promotable status. They pinned me corporal an hour into arriving with that company. And, I met the commander. He was prior 75th, and he comes up to me. He's like, yeah, we're going to use you and abuse you, man. Like you are going to work for me. I was like, Roger, sir. Roger that. Cool. As I'm going, we stayed there for a week, and I was in my own chew, which is, like your own barracks room. And I'm just sitting there. I'm like, oh, man, I don't know what I'm getting myself into. I don't know what we're landing into. And I don't know if I know my job well enough. I have cross-trained, but I just felt like I wasn't ready. But next thing I know, we're on the aircraft. It's like, I don't know, 1 a.m, and we're flying into Syria. And when things got real is when they turned all the lights off in the aircraft, and we end up landing. We had to pull out our nods and kind of run inside the fob. And first thing I do is go talk to someone that knows anything about the combo infrastructure on that fob, because when the commander told me I was going to hit the ground running, that's what I was going to do. I didn't wait for anybody to tell me. I was already on the gun, ready to go. So while I was there, we were able to build our own talk setup, which compiled of zipper and nipper, printers, phones, computer capabilities, and then we also managed to BDoc. So I was able to set up my own FM frequencies and radios in the BDoc to where we can still communicate with convoys that's moving out. And one of the biggest things that was a hindrance on the fob, on the installation, was that we were in this like trench of an area to where they weren't able to get good communications probably, I would say, like 5 miles out. So what I did was kind of think outside the box. I grabbed some vehicle mounted antennas, mounted them to the guard towers on top. And luckily that was able to help with communications, and we got more line of sight, farther distance. You know, I took on more radios that integrated our actual movements, which was more of a SATCOM based radio. So luckily I was able to actually go out on convoy patrols, movements, foot patrols, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I was doing what I wanted to do, and I wanted to make sure I did it to the best of my ability. And while I was there, you know, days were long. Days were really long. I would get up at like 6 in the morning, you know, and then work all the way till midnight. And then when we had to do ComSec changeover, I was out there till like 2 in the morning, knocking everything out. And luckily, at the time, I was attached, or a E5 11 Bravo was attached to me. Did not want to learn commo. He just wanted to be with his platoon. But you know, and as I'm going through this story, like there's a lot of people that I meet along the way that have helped me be successful in my career. And I was a brand new corporal, so you know, being an NCO was a little bit new to me. On top of that, I was still kind of learning my job and what I was doing. And you know, building connections with people is really what's going to take you far in whatever you do, right? You can always learn something from someone. And you know, I made him a proposition. I was like, hey, I'll teach you everything about commo that I know, and you teach me everything you know. So him being 11 Bravo, he had a prior platoon sergeant that was a sniper instructor, so he showed me how to, you know, do the math on how far the distance is when you're using a sniper rifle, how to breach doors, breach buildings. And I learned all that stuff while I was out there, and I was still learning my job and teaching him. So by the time it was the end of it, you know, I had to get flown back, I would say a month early for BLC, which is basic leaders course. And, you know, I took everything from my skill set to being a solid, good NCO that he kind of brought towards me and ran with that further, right? So I go through BLC, you know, and as you're going through your career in the military, deployments are becoming more unaccessible in a sense. And I met a couple of people that deployed already there, and some people that didn't, right? Everybody has their own journey, everybody has their own experience, but they all have knowledge that they can pass. So I met a lot of good people at BLC. I would say 2 months later, I picked up E5, so I became a sergeant finally, you know. And again, I was still at Quebec, right? I was working with satellites, but with me cross training as much as I did, I also took under my wing a couple of 25 uniforms, right? And that made me learn it doesn't matter what MOS you are, if you have knowledge to pass, like you're there as an NCO, you're there as a leader to provide that knowledge and have someone else take your shoes, right? So, you know, when we come back, we go straight to the field again, right? I am now running the CPN team. I'm helping with the S6 with their ComSec, the radio side. So I was pretty much the go-to guy for everything. I was very cross-trained and versatile in our career field. And you know, luckily along the way, like these guys that I mentored and trained, they became one of the best soldiers that I've worked with. You know, I still keep in contact to this day, and they're being successful. They're doing great things. You know, just by the knowledge that I passed on to them, and I'm very grateful that I made an impact on someone's life in the career. Next thing I know, right, we're going through another training event, another NTC rotation. I'm still working with the satellites, but this time my role was actual NCIC again. You know, getting thrown into these positions isn't really a bad thing, but it's a good thing because you're learning how to manage not only yourself but your soldiers in a, you know, crazy environment, training environment, because it can be a high stress environment. And I was definitely shocked that I was pretty much running as an NCOIC again. But during this NTC rotation, you know, there was a day that I got over, I would say, and I remember this specifically, I got over 200 phone calls, whether that was scouts, mortars, you know, companies, company reps, you know, first sergeants, commanders, all because they needed help with the communications. And this is the thing that really opened my eyes of team effort, right? Team effort. If you're not there to contribute, and if you're just there to do the bare minimum, which is, if you're doing the bare minimum, that's all right. But right, you're gonna have other people in your team that are pulling more weight, and it shouldn't necessarily be like that. So one of the biggest things that I enforced in my platoon is, you know, cross training. It doesn't, again, like, it's not going to hinder you by learning something else and adding to your skill set. And you know, we were already out in the box at NTC, and I have this one soldier coming up to me constantly every 5 minutes. Hey, I can't fix this, I can't fix that. And it kind of got to the point to where I'm like, all right, look, if you're not actively engaging for 30 minutes on this specific area that is, you know, messed up or needs fixing, don't come to me. You need to build that skill set of troubleshooting, and troubleshooting will go a long way, right? If you understand the basic concept of troubleshooting, that will take you super far in your career. If you're good at cross training, or not cross training, but troubleshooting, I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned in the military is troubleshooting, whether it's a striker, whether it's a radio, whether it's, you know, fixing inventories, troubleshooting, and understanding that skill set will definitely take you far, because that in the military is one of the biggest things that, you know, a lot of people kind of have difficulty understanding, because as you progress in your career in the military, you know, as you become an E5, E6, E7, you're not the guy that's, in a sense, going to be asking questions anymore. You're the guy that needs to figure out the answer to these questions, because you're going to have soldiers underneath you coming to you asking these crazy questions, and you got to be able to explain and elaborate to these guys. All right, you need to do this, this, this. Oh, I don't know that. All right, cool. I'm gonna go find an answer for you so we can get this done. Okay. So that training event was really it was crazy, because I was the NCOIC, I was an E5. I had two staff sergeants that were theoretically above me. And again, like, these are positions that you never know that you're going to get thrown into. But if you're doing good and you're successful and you know your stuff and you're a good leader, like, sometimes you're going to get thrown in these positions. And if not, I mean, that's perfectly okay too, because it allows you to see other people's mistakes and see how you would want to be as an NCO, as a leader, as, you know, a mentor. So again, like, you can learn anything from everybody. And as I'm going through all these things, right, and I think one of the biggest, craziest things that happened to me was that, you know, we were out there and I had no idea how to work an emitter. Emitter is like an old style radio that they used to use. It's for primarily FM and SATCOM. But a scout platoon leader actually showed me how to operate an emitter, right? And I had, you know, countless commo dudes that are well adverse in their career, and some of them didn't know how to use it, right? And I'm saying this because even though he was a scout, I was able to successfully learn something from him that benefited me in my career, right? And you know, around this time frame is when I come back from deployment. I already went through this whole field event and NCC rotation again, and I loved it. So it kind of led me to wanting to reclass, and you know, I went through my reclass transition. And sometimes in the military, it's a lot of check the block, right? I already knew the job, I already knew how to do it, but I had to go get qualified in the MOS and do that. I think after I was finished with that, you know, initially moving into that, I had a lot of, you know, good leaders that wanted me to go group. They wanted me to go special forces. They wanted me to go RASP. And I never thought I would ever want to do that. I think the main focus was me knowing my job, but the way that I operate, right, I always come prepared. Whenever I was in the field, whenever I was going to through a training event, deployments, I was the one that had everything. Like I had all the adapters, all the cables, extra antennas, anything and everything that can benefit me in the field. Because when I'm in the field or when I'm downrange, I want to make sure that everybody can talk. If someone can't talk, it's a failure on my part. And I really took it to heart. And you know, as I'm going through this reclass, my intentions was to go special forces, go to selection. But I think around that time is when I started having, you know, knee issues, back issues, and me being the guy that I am, you know, I'm so used to running and gunning, getting things done without any hesitation. It kind of did take an effect on me, you know, looking back that one morning, you know, I can just get up, go for a run. And now next thing I know, I have to get up early to stretch longer and then go for a run. So next thing I got orders to Fort Drum, 10th Mountain, and I was excited. And then initially when I was coming to Fort Drum, I was supposed to be going to one of the signal companies over here. And I thought to myself, all right, cool. I didn't really want to do it, but you know, it'll be a more slow pace. You know, I'll get to get back on my feet, get, you know, back into the groove of everything. And as I'm going through this, I go to brigade. They're like, nope, you're going to triple deuce. Okay, what's that? Light infantry. All right, cool. I know something. I've been in infantry before. You know, I'm going back home to what I know best. And these are all life lessons. Like whether you're in the military, whether you're you know, you're 24 years old or 26 years old coming in the military, you can use all these experiences in whatever you're doing. And as I get to Fort Drum, I meet my new leadership. And again, I'm not knocking anybody. I'm not knocking the Army, not knocking the leadership that I have. But you know, wherever you go, you're always going to have good leadership and bad leadership. And unfortunately, when I got to Drum, I had bad leadership. I had a sergeant first class that was never engaged full, didn't really know his job. I had two staff sergeants that, you know, were just there. And then there was me, right? I'm fresh out of reclassing. I'm ready to get back in the game. I'm managing ComSec, you know, managing radio maintenance, vehicle maintenance, literally doing all the inventories within the shop. I'm also doing all the counselings. And, you know, sometimes you have to understand when you need a break, right? You need to, if you're not, let's say that you're constantly working, right, and you don't take no leave days, and you continue to do this, you know, for like a year, you know, you're not going to be as beneficial to that platoon, to those soldiers, if you're not getting yourself a break, right? Because your vision gets clogged. You start, you know, stressing, getting more high stressed, especially doing all these things at once. And you know, it got to a point to where it was really hard for me. I was still the go-to guy for everything when I got here. As we started going to field events, you know, my name started getting out there. People started knowing who I was. They were constantly coming to me. And it became stressful for me, right? You know, everybody's going to go through their own thing. Everybody has their own thing in their life that, you know, can be a learning lesson. And this was one of my learning lessons along the way. You know, I couldn't keep up doing this forever. I was constantly stressing, you know, and a lot of soldiers, a lot of leadership, they preach on going to behavioral health. They preach all these things, but I think one of the biggest things that I kind of dealt with differently was allowing my soldiers in to understand that things aren't always as great, from what you see from day to day, right? I was going through severe depression, anxiety, um, and I was going through all these things already, and I was still managing to come into work and still work my butt off and do everything that needs to be done for my soldiers, and me being the NCO that I am and the way I am is that I didn't want soldiers to go through what I had to deal with when I was a specialist, PFC E5, right? Because I was worked a lot in those years, and I had no one to depend on, right? I had no leadership that really could take over for me, and I try to be that leader, that NCO, to kind of relieve some of that pressure off these soldiers. But you got to know that balance, right? If you're a team leader, if you're a platoon sergeant, you got to know that balance on allowing these soldiers to, you know, take the right step and take the initiative to really pull the weight, understand the job, but at the same time mentor them into molding them into someone that can replace you. Um, and we go through another field event. I'm showing all these guys how to do their job. Luckily, one of my buddies that's here now, he actually came at the nick of time, right before starting these field events, and having someone that I could rely on, having another battle buddy, E5, he first came in to produce, and I felt so relieved because I had some help, right? Um, and next thing I know, he stays with us for a month, goes to AOC, comes back, and we're in the game together, right? The sergeant first class kind of stepped down. Sergeant majors specifically started going to me and him. We started running the shop together, and we go to Jared to see. Jared to see, I learned a lot. I learned that my body is not as capable as it once was, but that's okay. I started definitely learning it's very important for you to, especially in the military, it's important for you to understand to take care of yourself as well, whether that's physical or mental. And I was already having these, knee, back pain, and it was kind of foolish of me, right? Because when I was at JRTC, I ended up getting assigned to the TAC. Only reason why is because, unfortunately, I knew a mass load of IT, to make sure everybody can talk. And I find out we're air assaulting in, right? I'm going in with the BC. I'm going with Sergeant Major. I'm going with the 3. I'm going with fire support. We're air assaulting in, and we go out 3 days early than everybody else. I'm like, cool, this is gonna be fun. And when I tell you, my ruck, it took 3 personnel to lift that ruck on my back. And like I said before, when I go somewhere, I take everything. I make sure I'm well prepared. And again, I'm saying this because I was foolish, right? So I had a big ruck full of just commo stuff, adapters, cables, antennas, extra batteries, radios, all these things. And I left my secondary ruck with them, which had all my clothes, my sleeping gear, everything else, right? And I'm air assaulting in. I don't link up with them until 3 days later. Come to find out, they lost my ruck, right? In between all this, right? We air assaulted in. They dropped the vehicle at a different location, so we had a ruck 3 miles. I had a ruck 3 miles with that heavy ruck. Next thing I know, I'm setting up SATCOM. I'm setting up everything that they need. And it took 8 days later to find my ruck. And being a soldier, I pack a whole bunch of nicotine. So I didn't have nicotine for 8 days, right? And I had no cold weather gear. I went out there with a combat top and combat pants and just the ruck that I had on my back. That was it. So I was out there on a tree just shivering away because it was cold during this time. And you know,
Oh man,
it sucked.
I can imagine.
It sucked for me. It really did. But looking back, they had constant communication with everybody, right? we barely went back to the talk, like maybe 2-3 times. And it was because I had constant communication with everybody, and I felt like that was a big success for me. We were able to talk to all the companies, the other battalions, brigade, and going through this. Next thing I know, we're on the last day, right? And it's like 9 o'clock at night. We're about to hit this movement, and we rucked for 10 hours. That was fun. And ComSec dropped on one of my radios for SATCOM, and I was going through it. Like my BC comes up to me, he said, "Hey, get them on SATCOM, yada yada yada." I'm like, I'm going through it, troubleshooting. I'm like, ComSec is not here. Something happened, and you're gonna hit those walls. You're gonna hit those areas of friction to where you're like, I can't really do anything about this, but how can I figure something out for him? So next thing I know, I bust out my HF, bust out my long whip, and I'm able to hit back to the talk. Whether that's, and as you're doing, like, there's always different methods to operate something, right? Whether you're programming, you're doing you're troubleshooting, a JBCP. There's always different methods, different ways you can overcome these obstacles. Whether that's me sending a voicemail on the radio or actually getting a direct connection with them and talking to them normally. So these are things that I definitely had to figure out, and luckily I figured it out. The BC was happy. We did a good training event that time. And as we're coming back, I think we come back for 2 months back to Fort Drum, and we're about to start prepping for deployment. And majority of the guys that I was going to deployment with, some of them never been on a deployment. So I tried offering my knowledge in regards to that. And, some of them listened, some of them didn't. And you can't always help everybody. And that's one of the things that you have to understand as well. Sometimes people got to go through their things to go through that learning lesson. And one of the biggest things that I told them is like, hey, we don't really need to take a whole bunch of stuff because we're going to be integrated with stuff down there. Next thing I know, we have a Connex full of SI, and we're not touching any of it. And it is what it is. And around this time frame, right, they were actually thinking about keeping me stateside. They wanted me to become the rear D NCOIC for the Essex shop. And me being the guy that I am, I refused. I was like, nope, I'm not staying back. I trained to deploy. I'm going on this deployment. So I made I would say a deal with the devil. And I explained, hey, I'll go out with one of the companies as a combo rep. I'll still manage the ComSec for battalion, and we'll go out there all together. And they agreed. So I go on this deployment. I'm running the NCOIC position for the S6 downrange, and I'm running with one of the companies. And and the intent was for me to go back out to Syria. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, which is fine, right? You get thrown these obstacles that you have to overcome. And luckily, me being there with the actual battalion and not going out to Syria with one of the companies, I learned more things. I learned how to manage a full platoon in this hostile environment, and learn new things, build new connections, right? I met up with I met up with some of the special forces guys, some of the Navy guys, as well as different coalition forces, and we worked together. I got to work on some of their systems, which was a big learning curve. Like one of the Navy guys came up to me with this old like German style radio, and he's like, hey, I can't fix this, I don't know what to do. And I go up to him, I'm like, I don't know what to do, I never worked on this, and it's German radio. Took me 5-10 minutes, figured it out, got it on, cut a radio check in, and like troubleshooting goes a long way. And if you know the basic concepts of troubleshooting, you can figure something out and make it good to go.
Hey Chris, can we do a quick time check because we have about 10 minutes left, and there were a couple questions from the team. Could you talk about your job search? Like, how did you land this job? What was the thing that? What was it? Certifications, networking? What was it?
So when we got back from this last deployment is when I kind of already had set in stone in my mind that I was going to be getting out. I had 2 bulging discs in my back. I got nerve damage everywhere, pretty much. I'm pretty much broken. But that kind of pushed me to definitely making this jump, making this leap to, all right, cool. I'm ready to get out. I did my service. I did do 2 deployments, and I came across your internship program, and it was exactly what I was looking for. Right, I wanted to do software engineering again, different IT spectrum compared to what I was doing in the military, but understanding the IT infrastructure within the military, I could definitely apply into this type of IT. And initially, I thought I wasn't going to be able to get a job. I'm brand new to software engineering. I was job hunting for a while. I was applying to jobs. I built my resume. I used resources that a lot of people provide to you, and sometimes some of these resources that don't get pushed down to you. But I ran across Hire Heroes, and they helped me work on my resume. I built that up finally, and luckily I was able to get into an internship with you, and I learned a lot of stuff being in this internship, and how the civilian work environment is. It's more your pace in a sense. You have more accessibility to do other things. You're not tied to a specific company, and I think that's one of the good things, right? Because there's always money to be made out there, different opportunities, and you're not stuck to that one. But again, like, I was applying to jobs, and as I'm going through this internship program, I built my portfolio. I'm doing a lot of training with cloud engineering, software engineering, and I wasn't really getting any feedback from applying to jobs, unfortunately. But that's where networking comes into play, right? One of my buddies reached out to me after seeing my portfolio. He calls me up. He's like, "Hey, yeah, man, you trying to come work for me? Like, I saw your portfolio. You're doing great stuff. You're learning all these new things. Like, we could definitely use you. On top of that, I knew what type of soldier you were. Like, you're good to go." And next thing I know, I'm going through the first interview process with them. I'm talking to the general manager, or the CEO of this company, and it's a small company, but it's a government contracting company, and they're super down to earth. They're people as well, and they just want veterans that have that knowledge and that skill set of being proactive, knowing how to troubleshoot and wanting to learn. Wanting to learn is like one of the biggest things that a company is looking for, right? Because if they have someone willing to learn, they can shape and mold you into whatever they need for that company to be successful. And I'm finishing up this interview process, and I'm talking to the tech leads, and they're asking me all these questions, and I was truthful. Like, some of the things I didn't know, but didn't mean I didn't want to learn, right? And I explained that to them, and next thing I know, I get a call back from the CEO, and he's like, "Hey, man, like, the team likes everything that you do. They think you will be a great success over here and working for our company." And they sent me the job offer, right? They sent me the job offer. I signed it off, and and let me explain to you this: I have 0 certifications because the amount of work that I put in the military rarely let me. It didn't really allow me to expand my knowledge and get security plus, A plus, net plus. And I'm starting off at 110. I'm making 6 figures. I'm about to. And sometimes it doesn't take a certification. Sometimes it takes you networking, right? Reaching out to some of the people that you used to work with, some of the people that already made that transition, made that big step, and learned from all that hardship to want to help their peers, the subordinates that they worked with. And I'm very grateful for everything that I've came across in the military. Yeah, some portions kind of sucked at times, but it got me to where I am today, getting this job interview, getting this job offer, and All it takes is that leap of faith. Like sometimes it's scary, but do know that everything will work out. Everything is going to buff. Everything's going to be okay. There's always different options out there for you, especially transitioning out of the military. But I would say that's pretty much my story. I hope everybody here kind of learns something out of it. I know I like to talk a lot. I definitely have a long story, and I've only been in 7 years. But I got a lot of compliment out of it. I picked up staff sergeant prior to getting out. I got 2 deployments under my belt, and now I'm landing this 6-figure job out of the military. When I would say 3 months ago, I honestly thought I was going to be solely relying on VA benefits and trying to go to school somehow. But reach out to people, reach out to your connections, networking can go a long way, especially if you present yourself accordingly, and and they see the knowledge base you have and skill set you have, and a lot of it ties into military, right? We learn how to be a leader, we learn how to learn our job, we learn how to shape and mold soldiers, whether you're a PFC to a sergeant major, right? You always have some value and some knowledge that can benefit yourself and other people around you in your career and wherever you go next. Is there any other questions that was
Want to see if anybody on the call has any questions. Otherwise, I have one last question if no one has questions.
Mhm.
Anybody? All right. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What's your long-term goal?
Long-term goal is it's hard. Long-term goal, I see myself still with the company that I'll be working with. A lot of great people there. Hopefully, and this job, right? I'm going in as a tech lead, right? I'm learning the application, learning VMware, which I kind of know the basics of already. But this company offers a DevOps team. Now they're not hiring anybody yet, but my goal is to, and they're kind of already tracking this because I made it known to them, is that I would like to get hired on as one of the guys in the DevOps team as well. So hopefully a couple years from now, I'm a part of that team, and I'm doing bigger and better things in the DevOps side.
All right. I think we're 2 minutes left. Just want to see if anybody else has any other questions. Okay. Well, just want to say it's been really inspiring knowing you, Chris, and
Thank you.
Congratulations. Yeah, you just in the time that you first called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, I'm interested in IT," and we talked a little bit about. I remember that conversation that day. You called me up and we talked. It must have been 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then I hear from you again. And it's like, "Hey, my packet got approved," and just to see, the transition you made is just inspiring. So you're a quality guy, and I look forward to seeing you in the DevOps role 5 years from now.
Yeah, I'm gearing towards that. I'm gonna work my butt off for it. But no, it's another thing too. Like whether you get out at 4 years or 10 years, you're not obligated to stay in all the time. I know a lot of soldiers, they hit that 10-year mark and they're like, I'm halfway there, I might as well stay in. But if you're not in it all the way anymore, and you're just there to be there, you're not doing yourself a justice, right? You're not doing your unit a justice, your soldiers a justice, because and this was a thing that was really hard for me to kind of step down out of the military, because I'm diehard military. Like I love the military. But sometimes you got to look at your situation, right? Sometimes use the military as a stepping stone. Sometimes you're not going to make it to the full 20, and that's okay. A lot of people, I'd never had that conversation with people before, and it was really hard for me to understand that I'm getting out of the military, and it's still hard for me to this day. And it's going to be hard after the fact, but it's okay, because there's a lot of veterans out there that are in the same position that you are, and y'all can both benefit from each other. And even though you have numerous of battle buddies in the military and they go different ways and different paths, that's fine too, right? What you need to focus on is what's going to be good for your situation and your career path and your life. At the end of the day, it's your life, whether you're gonna make that jump or not. Because looking back now, I am grateful that I'm making this jump now. I get to see my daughter and my son grow up. I'm been home more, but understand that it's going to be a hard transition, but understand that everything will be okay at the end. Everything will work out.
Well, Chris, I'm thankful that you're able to share your story with everybody, and hope somebody out there listens to this and they'll take something from it. At least I'm inspired. So I'll go ahead and close this call out. And again, wish you and your family the best of luck as you make your transition.
Thank you, Rod. I appreciate it. I'm grateful that you had me on here.
Yeah.